Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Katie Goddard and I'm a history teacher at Summit Public Schools Rainier, and I just completed this MOOC. So I am excited to share some of my key takeaways, my change ideas, and my next steps. I'm definitely a sucker for quotes, and there were a couple that resonated with me as I was thinking about the activities in this MOOC. The first one related to mindsets is this idea that what you get by achieving your goals is not as important as what you become by achieving your goals, by Henry David Thoreau. And as a high school teacher of ninth graders, I think I see this quote in action a lot with the way that sometimes very stressed out students approach grading in the classroom. So an example of this is a student of mine named Nayeli, who in the first 6 months of school has already become famous in my mind as someone who comes running up to me every morning and says, how do I get my grade higher? How do I get my grade higher? And every single day I feel like I'm having a conversation with her of, well, the way that you get your grade higher is you think about less about the grade and more about the process or the writing or whatever it is. So as a teacher, I always feel really inspired by this mindset research because I feel like it asks us to ask our students to focus much more on the process than the outcome. And it lets us value the feedback more than the grade. And it lets us value self-assessment more in some ways than the teacher evaluation of students. And that's definitely going to be something that I take away from this course, is that real license or permission or research-based finding that thinking about process with students is always going to be more important than thinking about the outcome when we think about how we can develop the mindset of our kids. So that's one. Another piece that this MOOC really made me think about is this very simple concept that actions speak louder than words. I think oftentimes in school, this idea of a growth mindset has taken hold to an extent. So we think a lot about using the word yet in our classrooms and things like that. But I really appreciated how much the readings and the podcasts in these courses pointed out to using the word yet is great, but if you don't have the structures and the routines in the classroom that are backing up the meaning behind the word yet, then it's all for nothing. So I really like to think about how the teacher moves that I make in my classroom impact the growth mindset and the messages about mindset that my students are getting. An example of this is that I think it's really easy when you're in front of the classroom and asking a simple check for understanding question to say like, yes, that's the right answer and move on to the next section. And what I would like to do better is building a habit of, instead of just saying like, yes, that's the right answer, asking students like, cool, how did you remember that? Or why do you know that that's the right answer? Or whatever some tweak is to get the emphasis off this idea of right or wrong and think more about like, is the student understanding the material? Things like that. Another example of this really does go to the feedback piece. I think oftentimes we know that an assignment's going to be hard for students, but we forget to tell them that up front and value the hard work that needs to go into doing an assignment. So I always appreciate the reminder of needing to work with my students on recognizing this is going to be hard. Here are the supports that I'm going to give you throughout the process to make sure that you know what you're doing and can get the feedback that you need. And here's why I believe it's important for you. So I'll definitely be remembering this idea of actions speak louder than words. And then the third piece that I thought a lot about throughout this MOOC is kind of the nuanced definition of relevance that I saw coming out in the readings and the podcasts. I really did like the idea that relevance was explained less in terms of like how can we connect the quadratic formula to what we do in the supermarket or in our, I don't know, managing our budget or whatever, and thought about relevance instead of like the skills in real life that we use. So it feels a lot more authentic to me as a teacher to be able to explain, we're doing this project because it's going to be really hard to learn how to write, and I want you to have practice learning how to work through things that are hard. that feels a lot more authentic and genuine for me to be able to explain to my students than to sometimes feel like I need to make those arbitrary connections of content to real life, inner quotes there. So that's another thing that I was really excited to think more about in this MOOC. That being said, there's a lot of things that this MOOC reinforced to me as reminders of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So in my classroom, I'm going to keep asking students to self-assess, having them reflect on process at the end of every class, giving feedback and then scores and then feedback again, and really norming that learning and growing process. I'll definitely keep making sure that relationships are built as a prereq to a rigorous classroom. I appreciated the one of the videos had said something about that, and I really liked that quote. Making sure that I celebrate growth and value the learning and include student voice. Those are things that I'll definitely want to continue to do and vamp up in my classroom in upcoming months. But in terms of change ideas, what this MOOC has made me think most about is how to figure out who needs a mindset intervention. And why I was so inspired by this is that I have so much data available to me. And what I've been thinking about, and you'll have to wait as I pull up some crazy spreadsheets, is how can I know that a student needs an intervention on a course or on their mindset. So what I did is I started looking at data from the first draft to the final draft of the project that students did. And then I also compared that with data on who grew from Project 1 to Project 2 in their overall course average. And what I looked for was, or what I thought about was, it doesn't bother me if a student isn't yet passing the course yet, because we have a policy of revision and resubmission at our school. What actually gets to me is if a student hasn't grown from Project 1 to Project 2 and they're still failing the course, because that to me points to something else is going on that's making it hard for the students to engage in some of the supports that were available over the course of the unit. I also have another source of data, which is student survey data, that I take the same survey at the beginning and end of every project. So at the beginning of, or at the end of Project 1, I had all of this data on how students felt valued or respected by the teacher and by peers, and I have the same set of information for the second project of the year. And what I ultimately want to do, and have started doing now, is use these points of data to zoom in on the students that I think would benefit most from an intervention on mindset. And then, of course, the hard work comes in of figuring out which mindset interventions work. And work is definitely in air quotes there, because figuring out what works and what doesn't in schools is always a tenuous process. I think that using these tools of data might help me make sure that I'm not missing anything in the classroom, and that I really am intervening with students who are most in need of something different to try to help them be successful within the system that we've created in schools. Finally, next steps. Obviously, there's a lot of work contained in just this slide before here, but what I've really enjoyed about the process of doing this MOOC and the process of being part of the SAIT community is the amount of support and coaching that comes along with figuring out how mindset can look in teaching and in mentoring in schools. So I think a lot of my next steps revolve around getting really, really clear feedback from my coach and from my colleagues about the ideas of different interventions and what works and what doesn't. A next step is really around trying to get some good data and track some good data about, when I try this, how does it affect student behavior in the classroom and attitude towards school. And I think there's always a next step of just continuing to learn and ask questions and read the different articles with suggestions on language of what to say with students, and talk to different people who are trying out this work to see what they're doing and what I can learn from them. But overall, it's been a really fun experience to jump into thinking about mindset and learning mindsets and skills in such a concentrated way through this MOOC. I really appreciate that I'm in a school where I can experiment with this stuff so much, and hopefully we'll be able to learn a lot about what kids need to learn how they learn in this process. Okay, thanks so much. Bye.